So hello everybody and welcome to November's webinar. And today we'll be discussing using XR in your organizations, beginning with launching a pilot to scaling. I'm Sophie Thompson, co-founder and CEO of VirtualSpeech, an online platform that blends e-learning with AI practice exercises available online and in virtual reality. As always, if you're joining us live and have any questions or comments, please put them in the Q&A box down below, and I'll make sure that we ask our guest. And today's guest is Luke Wilson, founder and CEO of ManageXR, which is an XR management tool for organizations. Luke graduated from Stanford University with a degree in computer science and has worked in the XR industry for 8 years. In 2018, he founded a company called Mighty Immersion with the vision of using immersive technologies to improve patient care. And it was while working to deploy thousands of headsets to over 200 children's hospitals that Luke realized there was a fundamental problem with XR deployment. And I won't say any more than that for now, as Luke will tell us himself. So thank you very much for joining us, Luke.
Sophie, thanks for having me. I'm stoked to be here.
Great, thank you. So yeah, let's start off just with a bit of background first of all. What is ManageXR?
Yeah, absolutely. So ManageXR is an XR deployment platform. And bottom line, we help people, organizations who are using XR deploy XR at scale. So typically when you're trying to get value from this technology, you're not just going to be using a single headset. You're going to be using 5, 10, 50, 100, thousands of headsets. Really depends on how you're using them, but it's going to be more than one. And in that world, you need a way to keep track of that hardware to make it easier to set up, all the value props and things that we can jump into. But bottom line is there are a lot of challenges when dealing with distributed hardware, and we make it easy to handle that.
Perfect. And I know we have got some people in the audience who have literally that problem, so they are definitely in the right place. And so I gave it a tiny intro that alluded to this. But why did you start Manage?
Yeah, so this is one of those things that you kind of fall into by you realize it's a problem by experiencing it. We find it's the same way for our customers. And so our origin story is quite similar to the story of many of our customers, in that we were actually deploying headsets in hospitals when we started to really grapple with the challenges of using XR at scale. So in my early days, just having graduated from college, started working with a group of anesthesiologists at Stanford Children's Hospital, and they were really on the cutting edge of using virtual reality as a means of improving patient care. And so I joined that team and was developing a lot of really cool medical content for pediatric patients. And essentially we were developing apps that were reducing pain and anxiety throughout the patient experience, whether it was in physical therapy or it was pre-surgery, post-surgery, things like this.
Amazing.
So it was truly an amazing opportunity, and it was really cool to be, in hospital rooms, putting headsets on patients, working with doctors and child life specialists, and just understanding the workflows of what it takes to actually get value from this technology. And throughout the few years that I was doing that, learned a ton. And one of the things I gained most appreciation for was just how powerful this technology is. I saw VR do things that I could truly only describe as magic in the healthcare setting, and saw it really have a positive impact on people's lives. And so it really sent me down this path of, wow, let's see how we can keep getting value from this technology, keep innovating and what we can do with it. And the best thing that happened to us was that it was working well. And what we ended up having was a VR headset with a bunch of content on it that could be used as a medical device in these scenarios. And I'll give one specific example just so people can kind of grapple onto it. One thing that we did that I was really proud of was we used virtual reality as a means of replacing general anesthesia for certain procedures in the hospital. So in some cases, a patient could would go into a hospital, and as a kid, it's often, if it's a scary procedure, in this case, it was a small incision, putting in an implant, a serprelin implant, and then a couple sutures. Now that was a scary procedure for kiddos, and so sometimes doctors would just use general anesthesia. Like 90% of the time, they would use general anesthesia in order to get through that procedure. Now, general anesthesia is not great for you. It's a painful process as a patient, and so what we actually were able to do was use virtual reality to replace general anesthesia and then just use local anesthesia. And so now you had patients who could come in and out, and the procedure took about 30 minutes rather than a full day of dealing with the pre and post process that's involved with general anesthesia. And so now the hospital at Stanford Children's, over 90% of the time, they're using VR as a means of facilitating their serprelin procedures. So that's just an example of many, many different things we saw VR being used for. And I know I just went deep on healthcare, and we're actually not here to talk about that, but it really just got me excited about what VR can do. We were tapping into a new piece of technology and a new way of interfacing with technology. And so the best thing that happened was we had this VR kit that we could now deploy within our hospital, and we got teamed up with a nonprofit to deploy that same kit to 200 different hospitals. And so now this was a completely different level of scale than we were used to, right? I was used to being in the hospital, running around, working with doctors. We grew from 5 headsets to 50, and that was its own set of challenges. But going to 1,300 headsets across 200 different locations was a completely different challenge. And so we jerry-rigged a solution that solved a lot of the problems. But to list some of the problems, how are we going to set up 1,000 devices? Like, that was a serious hurdle to really consider, because there's one thing to be in my garage setting up devices, and I can do a handful a night, and that's going to get us pretty far, but not with 1,000, especially when you're trying to deploy, in one fell swoop and really kick off a program. So how are we going to set up 1,000 devices, which comes out to thousands of hours of work? How are we going to make these devices updatable remotely? Like, the last thing I can do is put the burden of updating devices and keeping them in sync with the software that they need to have on the end user. I can't put it on a doctor, I can't put it on an IT staff. They've got too many other things to do. And I certainly can't put it on the end user who, in this case is an 8-year-old, but in an industry, even in a kind of industry example, it's still an employee who's got a lot better other things to do. So those are some of the challenges that we had to face. We jerry-rigged a solution, but it really got me grappling with how difficult it is to deploy XR at scale. And to me, I realized this wasn't just a healthcare problem. This was an industry problem. And it's the barrier between VR and XR succeeding and being adoptable and not. If we can't use this at scale, there's really no point in being able to deploy this and try using it in an enterprise. So that was my introduction to this very niche set of problems. And that's how I kind of fell in love with this crazy problem set. And what we ended up jerry-rigging for ourselves in the early days is, COVID hit, we hunkered down, and we built ManageXR as it is today. And so now it's not healthcare. Healthcare is one of our primary verticals, but it's also enterprises who are using VR for learning and development, which is what you're quite familiar with. It's also in the educational space. So we've got, K-12 and higher ed universities using XR in really significant ways. And then, of course, healthcare, patient care, things like that we're also quite excited about. But we're seeing XR used in a lot of really cool ways. And we support the innovators on the front lines who are figuring it out and deploying these headsets at scale.
Wow, you've come a long way in only a couple of years. If you started in the pandemic, that's amazing. And working with, if we just focus on enterprise for a minute, when we look at organizations, what are the most common challenges that you're seeing them face with rolling XR out in the workplace?
Yeah, I think it's the same set of challenges that we faced, 6 years ago when trying to do our own 1,300 headset deployment. And this is the same set of challenges that we walk all of our partners and customers through, right? So the first one is, how are you going to set up all those devices? And I know that these are the challenges that are easy to overlook. In fact, it's such a boring question and challenge that you just choose not to think about it until it's too late. But how are you going to have 100 headsets ready in a way that when you put an employee in that headset, it is fully ready to go and they don't have to think about anything else other than the training they're supposed to be doing? This is that last mile that really is critical to the success of a deployment. And so when you're setting up a deployment, you can't put that burden on somebody else without them at least recognizing what a real challenge it is. So if you're using a device, you should expect about a setup time of 30 minutes to 1 hour per device. So when you're doing 1,000 devices, you're looking at weeks and weeks of work. Weeks and weeks of work with a lot of people and hands involved. So we help people solve that problem by, one, building tools that just automate a lot of the setup process for you. There still has to be a physical touch of the device during the initial setup phase. But we can automate a lot of those processes for you. And we can also have a wide network of partners who do this provisioning work for you and on your behalf. So if you want to, have these devices, if you're purchasing brand new devices, you can have them actually delivered to you fully set up and ready to go. And I think that's a thing, you're working with resellers at that point, and that's a world that many don't know exists. And so we can help kind of connect those dots for you. So that's challenge one, right? Setting up devices. Challenge number two is, in an organization, you're going to be using a variety of different content, and that content's also going to update over time. The bottom line is we are a new industry and things are being innovated all the time, and you're going to need to be updating your apps. And so an app update, again, doesn't sound like a hard thing to do. If I've got my iPhone out, yeah, it just does it automatically. But there's actually a lot of things behind the scenes that are making it so those apps can update on their own. And in VR, you need a tool like ManageXR to do that. Because if you don't, you have an app that gets out of date. And then really, if it's a custom application, the only way to keep it up to date is to plug it into your computer and side load a new application, which is something you just can't ask anybody to do, especially if you've got thousands of devices out in the field. So making sure that your devices are all up to date. The third one is locking those devices down. And this is a really important one, really in every deployment, but in enterprise and organizations who are using VR for learning and development, when you put on that headset, you want to be able to go directly into the application that you're in. And because you want them to start doing their training. You can't have 5 to 10 minutes of figuring out what's going on. So with ManageXR, we lock down the headset environment so that you are presented with a home screen with just a single application or the 3 different apps that you've approved. You can also lock the device down to just a single application so that when you put it on, it's actually straight up in VirtualSpeech and you can't go anywhere else.
No playing games.
Exactly. Right. So you don't want people getting lost. And if you put on a Quest today and you try to go load an application, it's between 3 and 5 clicks to find that application. You've gone through many VR demos. You know the challenge of putting a headset on someone and then not being able to see what's going on and trying to verbally bring them through a series of steps. It's really hard. And Sophie, you can probably do it because you've done it a million times and you know your app like the back of your hand. But it's not you who's guiding these VR experiences typically, right? Like when you're deployed at scale, you have medium experienced people guiding people with no experience. And so everyone needs support, even the trainers. So anything you can do to minimize that friction, in my opinion, is the most critical piece of making these things successful. Every point of friction is an opportunity for someone to get frustrated, for someone to not like VR, and for them to just give up. So those are 3 really big challenges that we help solve and that I believe are critical to that kind of last mile delivery. the reason I harp on it is because there's so many other challenges involved in an XR deployment, building great content, creating a program within your organization so that you can get value from it, and getting buy-in from everybody to even try this crazy thing. The last thing you want is for that last mile to be interrupted and just to be dealing with device drama the whole time. Because you've already spent a lot of time and energy getting to this point. So those are some of the big challenges that we tend to be seeing in organizations.
Yeah. And it's really just about making everyone's lives easier, from the people who have decided to try this training to the end user. It's just making the experience just easier for everyone. Are there any trends that you've noticed in adoption of VR at an organizational level? So excuse me, you spoke about healthcare, education, enterprise. Are there any trends that are common amongst all three of them, whether that's like use cases of VR from things like meeting rooms, training, etc.?
Yeah, absolutely. So we see a lot of really cool things happening in the kind of learning and development realm. So when you're talking about enterprise usage, it tends to be like the vast majority of it is learning and development. And this just comes from the fact that there's really no better way to learn something than by doing it. And VR gives you that opportunity to fully immerse in whatever that thing is and to do it and to get your reps in. And so I'm probably speaking to an audience that already knows VR and AR quite well, and I don't need to go through the rigmarole of explaining why being able to do a task over and over again and train on it is a huge value for VR rather than needing to do it out in the field. But the bottom line is that's where, as you know and you see it, it's learning and development. Some of the use cases, again, it kind of splits between soft skills and hard skills. Soft skills, super important. And that really, I think, is where VirtualSpeech is amazing. And, practicing hard conversations, all the things. Honestly, I'd love you to tell me about the soft skills that you guys are seeing being trained in virtual reality. But just to add the other piece, it's the hard skills as well. So to be able to practice making a burger at McDonald's, right? And go through the steps of actually doing it in these areas, in any area of the business that, we've seen some really cool things happen in the quick service restaurant type of industries, as well as in oil and gas and manufacturing, any industry where you need to train employees on how to do a specific thing. Even if it's, pilots learning how to use a cockpit, like the examples of training are kind of amazing. And there's a lot of them, but bottom line, it comes down to hard skills and soft skills. That's what we're seeing VR being used for in enterprise. Yeah.
I would say when we first entered the space, pretty much everybody was doing hard skills. So there were a lot of examples of oil companies or emergency services with like fire extinguishers and stuff. And like soft skills wasn't the like sexy thing to be doing. But over the last, I would say 3 years, we've seen a lot more people enter the soft skills space, as I think more and more people have realized that VR is a perfect tool for practicing things like conversations, and just interactions with colleagues as well. And so for anybody who listening who is starting out with their VR journey, how can they get started with VR training? So if we take L&D specifically, how would you recommend they get started?
Yeah. So I found that getting started is the hardest part, right? Like there are so many different things. So, it's very easy to get overwhelmed with all the decisions that you have to make. When you're, running an L&D, you're working in L&D of a large organization, you're excited about VR. Now you have to figure out, what is your use case? How are you going to actually run that program? What devices and hardware are you going to use? All these questions. And then you have to go build this program and pitch it to someone in the organization to actually help you invest in making this thing a reality. So It's an overwhelming number of challenges to solve. And so what I tend to recommend is this concept of a bite-sized pilot. So what's the smallest thing that you can do to learn as much as possible about how it is, what it takes to deploy XR in an organization and get value from it? So the way that we recommend getting started is buy a single headset. At this point, if you have VR, you probably already own one. If you're excited about VR in any way, you probably already own one. Buy one. It costs $300 if you don't have it. If you're going for an Oculus, Meta Quest, you can start with a Quest 2 or a Quest 3. Now, at scale, there's a lot of great hardware options. But if you're trying just to get started and you just want to understand what it means, just buy a Quest and don't think about it. Because you can get that at Best Buy or anywhere down the road. At scale, Quest brings its own challenges, and I'm happy to dive into those specific details. But if you're going for a bite-sized pilot, get a consumer device. Now you need to just try out all the different content that exists out there. You need to understand what different ways you can pull value from these headsets in your organization. So with ManageXR, we have a part of our platform, which we call DiscoverXR. And VirtualSpeech is actually a part of this, which we're thrilled to have you on. DiscoverXR is an opportunity just to discover what is out there. And we have a library of demo applications targeted specifically to enterprises, education, and these different, at scale use cases. And you can go through and try lots of different demo content just to get a sense of what you find valuable. So at this point, you have now gotten a great chance to understand what's out there. And now it's just a matter of actually running a program with one of these demo applications. You can actually, some of these demos have something you can really get into the meat of and try a 10-minute experience, which is really all you need to try. So the next thing we recommend doing is actually running a little pilot with real people in your organization. Put people in headsets. You're going to learn so much about just the challenge of using XR at scale by putting 5 people through a headset experience. Be in the room with them while they go through that experience and watch them and take notes and maybe have them answer a survey afterwards. But what I'm pitching here is just don't overwhelm yourself with trying to go big too fast. Start small and learn as much as you can. Use a demo application, use it on a few people, understand the challenges of just using the headset. You're going to learn that when you put a headset on someone, you should train them how to use the controller before you put the headset on. Like these small little things that you're only going to learn those workflows until you really get going. So that's a bite-sized pilot in a nutshell, right? Run a few people through that headset, get their feedback, and now you're going to have so many more answers and to be able to speak with confidence to the other people in the organization that you need to pitch on growing a pilot and getting more value. In that whole process, I hope you've kind of reached out to VirtualSpeech because you're trying it, right? You've reached out to Sophie and you're chatting about how to really get the most value from that content. And that's what your next pilot looks like, right? It's like digging deeper into the content that you're using. That's our pitch. I'd love to know from your perspective, how do you recommend getting started?
Yeah, so we recommend starting with a pilot as well. We would say usually a minimum of 10 people, I would say. But I love the way that you just pitched it effectively as one headset, 5 people, DiscoverXR, $300. Is DiscoverXR free for people to use those demos?
We have a 30-day trial on ManageXR. You can use everything for free. And then after that, I know a guy who can extend your trial if you're running a real pilot. So please reach out. Yeah.
So 1 month, 1 headset, 5 people, DiscoverXR, $300. Off you go. That's your first pilot. I love that. That's such a good idea. We tend to have people. So we have pilots ranging from 10 people right up into. We have a company who's doing a pilot with 1,000 people, which I would call more of a rollout personally. But yeah, it completely varies. But yeah, they usually would share headsets in those first stages as well. And to be honest, even at scale, they would usually share headsets too, just because of where we're at in the industry at the moment. So For anyone who, for example, might want to do a bite-sized pilot, or who might already be doing a pilot, can you take us through a step-by-step process of what that would look like using Manage? So they've got their headset.
Yeah.
They want to demo VirtualSpeech for a month.
Yeah.
How do they get Manage onto their headset?
Yeah, that's a good question. I did kind of skip over that part. So once you've got a headset, ManageXR is it's a SaaS platform, right? So you can log in, you can create an account all on your computer. There's going to be one phase of getting ManageXR onto that device. And so that involves plugging your device into your computer. And then we have a device setup tool that's kind of going to run through the process of registering that device into your account. The reason why we recommend getting ManageXR onto your device early, it's not the first thing you're going to think of. You're not going to think, I need an MDM for one device. MDMs are for IT programs and massive scale. And we really don't think that's true. In fact, most of the people who use our platform, they're not in IT. They're program runners such as yourself who are trying to just make this work. Then they partner up with IT. At massive scale, IT definitely gets involved, and we recommend bringing them in. But it's not going to be an IT person who's helping you with one device. And so setting up the device is going to take a few minutes once you've kind of gotten through the process. Some of the biggest challenges of getting a headset set up, the parts that take the longest, are just getting through those initial phases. Like with the MetaQuest, you have to attach it to your account and all this thing, all the stuff you have to do with your phone. You've probably already gotten past all that point. So you're going to install ManageXR. But the reason we recommend using ManageXR is you're going to get you're going to understand what it takes to do things at scale at an early phase. You're also going to get the benefits of being able to lock that headset down and make the pilot that you're about to run easier. So when you put that headset on your employee or your teammate to do a small training with them, they're going to be locked in to VirtualSpeech. They're not going to be clicking on on a store page front with an advertisement for this game and a video from YouTube over there. You're going to be able just to jump right into your experience. So that's why we recommend using an MDM early. Like there's a ton of value in the day-to-day usage of a headset that ManageXR can bring. And it's going to help you get over some of those initial hurdles and not kind of be scared of what that actually might imply at scale, because you'll already have solved that. Mm-hmm. So yeah, the step-by-step, install ManageXR, and then go from there. I mean, you've got a library of content going to be shown to you on your computer. You're going to click add to device. That device doesn't need to be connected to the computer at that point. Once it's set up, it should never touch a computer again. You're going to click add to device. That content's just going to automatically install on your device, and you're going to be able to get going. So truly within a matter of 20 minutes you're going to set up a device, and you can have as many demo apps on your devices as you can handle. And then it's just a matter of trying it out and having fun in the headset and kind of planning out, what does it mean to take 5 or 10 people through an experience? What are you trying to get from that? And take it from there.
Yeah. And it also means that people's time has been freed up so they can focus on all the other things that they would think of when launching a new program. Because I mean, something that I think is quite often forgotten in L&D in general is that marketing to the learners as well. That it's like, imagine how much effort people have put in to bring VR training to the organization, but then if nobody knows about it, they can't do it. So it's really good to be reducing those friction points so people can focus on the end user rather than the logistics. I would say that's the biggest challenge that our customers have, is around the logistics, around the headsets. That's something that just consistently for the last 8 years has been a problem.
Yeah.
So we've spoken about micro pilots and bite-sized pilots. So somebody's done a pilot with ManageXR, VirtualSpeech. It's gone swimmingly well. How would people then scale? So what advice would you give to organizations looking to scale past that pilot stage?
Yeah. Well, you've already followed the advice I typically give, which is start using ManageXR early, right? Like, start understanding that there is a tool set out there for you to be able to alleviate the stresses of scale early. So now that you've got that, it's truly, how are you getting those devices? Where are you shipping them? And how are you running your program? So let's assume, we'll take an easy example to start. Let's assume that you will need 50 headsets at one particular site, and you're going to you need them all in one place. It gets difficult when you're trying to distribute them over many different areas. But so once you do that, who's setting them up? Think that through. If you don't want to be setting them up, which you probably don't, work with ManageXR and a reseller to do all that setup phase for you. And then the world's your oyster. These devices are set up, they're locked down. You're going to be able to see them online from your management console, all in one place, so that you'll know when they're being used, how they're being used. You can troubleshoot them if anything goes wrong. I think honestly, once you've got ManageXR on these devices already, you have followed a lot of my advice already, and I think you're set up for good success. But again, you're going to run into challenges. Like, this isn't easy work, and I think just rolling out, I wouldn't recommend going from one headset to 1,000. That's pretty tough. So go from 1 to 50. We've seen that work quite well. And then go from 50 to 500. So those tends to be the kind of the process. But yeah, what do you recommend when someone is ready to go from a small pilot to a large one, and they've been using VirtualSpeech? I mean, I'm sure tell me, what are some of the things you recommend?
So it sounds obvious, but I think sometimes people, once they go from pilot and then they decide they want to roll out further, they kind of forget everything they learned in the pilot. So first of all, just listening to your own learnings and yourself with them, and actually learning those lessons. So if you had a problem with, well, I know this happened to one of our clients, that the learners were getting distracted by all the other content on the headset. So if you know that's a problem, how are you actually going to solve that, rather than just thinking, oh, it's something we've just got to live with? Like, is there a solution for that? And like an MDM could be a solution for that. So yeah, learning from your own lessons. I would say obviously listening to the end users, but also having an option that is non-VR. So for accessibility reasons mainly, whether that's people don't want to use VR or they can't use VR for whatever reason, you don't want to isolate people from being able to do the program because they don't have VR. So that's something that I would always say I encourage it at pilot level anyway, but especially when you're scaling and you're getting, as you say, if you've gone from a pilot of 10 people, they've probably opted into it. You've been able to kind of hold their hand a bit with this process. But once you go to 50, you've not got the time to give that one-to-one attention, really. So it's always good to have an alternative offering that is perhaps more familiar to them. So if they are struggling with VR, they can just dip into the online version instead. So yeah, those would be my top 3 tips for scaling. You mentioned about recommended resellers that you work with. So are you able to tell us about any of them, just for anybody listening who might be looking for them, and do they depend on the device that people are looking for, or are most of them device agnostic?
So there is, the reason we typically recommend people start with us is because we can help navigate based on your needs, right? Like, are you based in the US, or are you in Europe? Are you somewhere else? What kind of hardware are you trying to deploy? Do you need them to set it up for you, or can you do that provisioning on your own? All of those things will influence kind of what's the best partner for you. But on the US side of the house, we work with SHI and CDW and Insight. Insight is global, so now it's nice with Insight is you can deploy headsets in the US and in the UK using the same team. So on the EU side, we work with Schenker and a few others. And so these resellers are all experts at what they do, and they're going to help you buy the hardware. Most of them are agnostic. You're going to be able to buy Quests, Picos, and HTC. And from these headsets. And Lenovo is a new device that's also entering the field. Still early days for them, but I think you're going to be able to find the right hardware from these resellers. And these resellers are used to working with enterprises. I think as early adopters, we're not necessarily used to working with these large reseller organizations. Like when I first learned about resellers a few years ago, it actually was kind of like a new world to me. But it makes a ton of sense. Bottom line is we are used to buying devices, hardware from Amazon.com or from Best Buy. But that's not, if you want to buy 10,000 devices, you don't go to bestbuy.com. There are specialized resellers that deal with this type of B2B purchasing. And so then when you go to an SHI, they even have these really cool, SHI is this cool configuration center where you can go in and you walk this massive server rack, and they basically demonstrate all the different hardware that they offer in one place. And you feel like you're in the, it's Best Buy for businesses, right? Like you're really in the heart of some cool operation where you can buy not just one device, but tens of thousands of them. So anyways, there's a world out there. And if you work in a large enterprise, your business has close relationships with most of these resellers already. And so it's pretty easy to reach out and set up a large purchase order with the services involved.
And chances are they're set up as a supplier already, especially the likes of Insight, SHI. Yeah, brilliant. So you hinted at it earlier when you said that for a micro pilot to like buy a Meta Quest 2 or 3, for example, but you wouldn't necessarily want to use them for a wider rollout. So in your opinion, what are some of the challenges with, say, using the Quest for a larger rollout? And is there another device that you would recommend over it, and why? Sorry, that was 3 questions in one.
For sure. I'll start by saying what we see most at scale at ManageXR are Quests and Picos. And we see a lot of challenges that can come up, especially in the early days with Quest, as you start to get familiar with the enrollment process. Quest can just have a kind of painful enrollment process. And the real reasoning behind that is a Quest is a consumer device, and it's designed for one-to-one usage. It has to have a user account on it, and that user typically should be a real, user. Now we have ways around that you can kind of start to bulk create test user accounts. But the bottom line is that when you are doing thousands of devices, this whole account layer on top of the hardware device setup layer can make for some serious challenges. And that's just a fundamental difference between how VR is used in the industry today, in enterprise, and how it's used at a consumer level. Consumer, it is one-to-one. In enterprise, it tends to be a shared device. And it needs to be generally usable, across many different people. So that's where you're going to feel some of the pain with Quest. Once you've set up your devices and you're ready to rock and roll, Quest is a great device. But overall, a little bit less controllable than an enterprise-specific device like the Pico. So we really love Pico. We see, many Picos deployed at scale. And we've been kind of an early partner of theirs since the beginning. The Picos are going to be really fast to set up. You can also, what I love about Pico is you can work straight with their factory. If you're buying, like many thousands of devices, they will do all the work at the factory for you.
Oh, wow, that's cool.
They're also used to working with enterprises, right? Like you're actually going to have a person you can talk to at Pico. Whereas with Quest, it's less of the case. So at scale, we tend to push people towards Pico, but you're going to be able to, once you kind of have that list of pros and cons, you can make your own evaluation, and at some point you're gonna be able to succeed with both. We've seen it happen. HTC is a great device as well. The reason people don't tend to go for it is price. But there are reasons where you don't want to be attached to Meta, you don't want to be attached to ByteDance. Then you fall back onto these more expensive enterprise devices that that are great hardware once you're okay with paying, 2 to 3 times as much for them. So that's with the Vive and the Lenovo. That tends to be where people go next.
Okay, interesting. We've had quite a lot of questions. I have actually answered one by asking you that anyway. I'm just having a quick run through. So Michaela, your colleague, is answering a couple of them for us as well.
Oh, hello. Thanks, Michaela.
Thanks, Michaela. But a couple of the questions, so one of them was around, if we decide to use ManageXR to set up 1,000 devices, how could this work? So yeah, they if they were using MetaQuest 2 or Quest 3, how would that work if they were to use Manage?
Yeah. If you were to use ManageXR, we'd be recommending working with us and a provisioning partner. And essentially there are a lot of ways you can go. At one point, you need to create 1,000 accounts, right? Like you need to create 1,000 Meta accounts. Those can either be full-on Meta accounts, or they can be what Meta calls test users. And test users is kind of a trick that is great for using at scale. It's going to block those devices so that you can't access the Meta store, which is typically fine in an enterprise use case. But it is, and you're going to be able to create many of those. So you can actually bulk create test user accounts. Once you have all your accounts, you're going to go through the process of setting up a device and attaching an account to a device. And then you're going to go through the process of enrolling that device in ManageXR. You're going to do that 1,000 times. So when we work together, we tend to, like, if you're talking about 1,000 devices, we love to work with you early and really just chat through your strategies. Like there's a lot of little decisions to make along the way that come with their own trade-offs. And rather than go through every single one of those here, it tends to be a conversation that we have. And at some point we might recommend, hey, this is the provisioning partner. If you're trying to save time, it's going to cost X dollars per headset to get them set up more, but it's not going to be thousands of hours of work you're putting on someone else on your team. So that, and that, I'd really, at that point, we recommend working with us and having that conversation. It's, this is what we love to do. We've done it many, many times, and building a relationship with you is a really important part of our process and understanding your needs, because everything's a little bit nuanced and specific.
Yeah. I would definitely recommend, if you're setting up 1,000 headsets, to work with a provisioning partner to help you do that, because that could be extremely long. But once either you've invested the time yourself or you've worked with a partner to do that, after then it's a very low touch point from them when it comes to updates and stuff. They can automatically be done from Manage, can't they?
Yeah, that's exactly right. Once everything's set up, our goal is you never have to touch that headset again. Once it's, it can connect to your Wi-Fi network. Again, a good conversation to have with us, understanding what your Wi-Fi needs are. Enterprises typically have complex Wi-Fi networks. Are you going to just connect to their guest network, or are you going to connect to their enterprise network and get certificates on these devices and things like that? These are all things that we can work with you, partner. If you are on IT, you know what I'm talking about. If you're not on IT, we might pull IT in and start working through those challenges together. But each one of those little decision-making points, we can help you, and we can also just make it easier. So yeah, and it can all be done remotely. That's the whole point of ManageXR, right? It's, once you've set them up, you can deploy your apps, you can edit your Wi-Fi networks, you can lock headsets down and change all of those settings in any way you want later.
Great. And Elaine asked, would ManageXR replace having to have a Meta account? To which Michaela has answered technically no, and you've basically said that as well. But then Michaela has talked about your test user accounts that you just mentioned too. So for anybody who hasn't seen Michaela's answer there, she's also left her email there for you. Thank you, Michaela. Thank you, Elaine, for your question. Stefan has asked, have you got any solution to analyze and simplify the data security of the headsets in companies in different countries?
Yeah, so data security, I think there's a lot of different things that could mean. On one hand, you are talking about securing the device so that people can't access deeper elements, right? So there's two things to secure there, right? There's making sure that the user can't go access games, because you don't want them doing that. Making sure the user can't access device settings, so that they can't edit settings and change things there. Things like as simple as all of a sudden a user adds a password to a device, and now that device is locked down in a way that no one else can use it. Like those are the things you'll find happening in like an education, in a school. Some precocious 8th grader is going to do that. So you want to make sure that you can prevent that. You then are also talking about the data that's on the device. You don't want to be able to pull that data off of it sometimes. Let's say you are deploying, proprietary 3D models or applications to these devices. You want to make sure that anyone can't just pull that stuff off. So yes, with ManageXR, there are remote kind of security settings on Android that prevent a device from being plugged into a computer and communicated with. So now that device is basically siloed and can only communicate with ManageXR. And then there are other elements of security that get really, enterprise specific, talking about your user data, what applications you're using, and things like this. And that really where it depends on what apps you're using and how we can help. But where ManageXR tends to shine, and what IT people are going to expect from an MDM like ManageXR is locking that headset down so you can't communicate it with it via computer, and also locking it down inside the headset so you can't change settings you don't want to be setting.
Yeah. Okay.
I guess the third thing I'll add to that is connecting to your enterprise networks. Like that is the biggest piece for IT, making sure these devices can securely connect to your Wi-Fi. Yeah.
And are those conversations that you have with the IT teams?
Yep, exactly.
Yeah. Okay, great. Thank you. So going back to the bite-sized pilots, Stacey Michelle has asked, if we were to run one of these small pilots, what are some of the typical misconceptions we might hear from people about using VR, and how can we counter those?
I think one of the most common things you'll hear is that is fear of getting nauseous. And that is not illegitimate. Some people really will get nauseous. However, from our point of view, it's as an implementer, there are things that you can do to reduce that. Have a seated experience where people aren't doing a lot of crazy things. Choose content that's designed appropriately. It's really easy to make someone sick if you throw them in a roller coaster. Guaranteed they're going to have a bad time. But if you're using, a piece of content that's designed to be stationary and isn't doing anything too wild, you're gonna avoid that challenge, and you're gonna overcome that fear. So I think that's a big one. Just choose the right content. As early adopters, you have your VR legs, and all of a sudden you're like, oh, but this app's really cool, even though it does fly me around the world and make me feel a little bit weird. But over time, I don't feel weird anymore, right? You get those VR legs. Be really cautious of throwing someone into one of those more intermediate or advanced VR experiences early on. So I think that's a good one to overcome and think about. Anything else, Sophie, anything else that you'd add to that, just in terms of?
Yeah, so I would add about not spending too long in VR at a time. So for example, with VirtualSpeech, all of our exercises are 15 minutes or less, because that reduces the likelihood of motion sickness. But I mean, as you said, that it's one of those things that people talk about it a lot more than is needed, considering the number of people who experience it. And there's a lot of people who might have tried VR 5 years ago and they did a roller coaster in a Google Cardboard app. And that's a very different experience to using Quest for training, for example. So yeah, the only thing I would add is around the length of time that you spend in VR. I think if you're rolling out at an organizational level as well, it's quite interesting to know that motion sickness is more likely to affect women than men as well. So, I mean, that's just something to bear in mind when you're doing a bite-sized pilot, is to make sure that you have that mixture of men and women as well, in case it affects one group more than the other. I mean, it shouldn't do the way VR is at the moment. And if you're using a vendor that is very conscious of that, but yeah, just in case, definitely have a combination of of different types of people and different demographics when you're doing your pilot. Thank you, Nino, who was just put in, so Nino's on the VirtualSpeech sales team, who was just put in a link to a blog post that we've done about motion sickness in VR, and that talks about some of those things. Great. So this question is very timely. So obviously, so yesterday, Meta launched their new Meta for Business platform, and this could create some confusion in the market on picking the right MDM solution or not knowing which one to go with. And I'd just be interested to hear your thoughts on the new platform and how Manage differs from it, really. Just because I think at the moment there's probably like people don't know enough about any of the platforms to know what does what.
Totally. Yeah, absolutely. So Meta for Business or Quest for Business launched this week, and certainly exciting to kind of see what kind of impact that's going to have on the industry. And in many ways, we're excited about any opportunity that can bring these types of use cases up to center stage more, and seeing dedication to this market, the enterprise market, from a player like Meta is exciting. That said, if we're to differentiate ourselves, I think it's not uncommon for hardware manufacturers to have a first-party solution, and that ends up being a good way to dip your toes in, but it's not going to be a complete, very specific solution for XR at scale. It's a quick way to get your devices managed, but you're not going to have that deep reach feature set. And so from ManageXR, from our perspective, we've been deploying headsets at scale for 5 years now. And with that comes a lot of experience and an understanding of the challenges you're going to face. And so we pride ourselves in being able to work with you and kind of work closely on the strategy of your deployment. I think it's not necessarily something you're going to be getting from Meta for Business, and because they're working at a different clip and a different pace. The other thing I'll say is, with a first-party solution, you're vendor locking yourself. And so if you want to try other hardware, you then have to have a different management solution for that hardware. So we see, actually, we looked at our numbers across our top 50 ISVs. 90% of them are using deployed both types of hardware. And I think that's a really important thing to recognize, that their different hardware is valuable for different use cases. And so it's important to recognize that you will probably need a variety, or will at some point have a variety. And so, yeah, when you're working with an experienced team like ManageXR, you're just going to get a deeper feature set across all the hardware. So it's a bit more future-proof. And the final piece I'll add to this is about the expected use. So, I think Meta definitely has designed a lot of their processes and their hardware around a one-to-one use case where you have a single headset owned by a single employee, because they're going to have their own personal Meta account attached to it, their business Meta account attached to it. It's really designed for that one-to-one case. And that's not really how the world works today. We don't see massive one-to-one deployments happening. We see large shared deployments happening. And so those are a lot of the use cases that we've designed our software around, and it's going to be a little bit different over there.
Yeah. Great. Michaela has also revealed an exclusive that you'll be posting a blog post in the next week or so talking about this topic. So I think that will be very helpful for people. And I think what you said about locking yourself to a device is really interesting, that actually when you look at companies who are rolling this out at scale, most of them don't just have one headset provider. So yeah, that's a really important thing to bear in mind.
Also, it's not just VR, right? Like when you start rolling this out in mass, you're also probably working with AR devices. There's just a variety of different types of hardware. We think of ourselves as helping in all immersive technology, VR, MR, AR. So yeah, certainly the vendor lock is important.
Great, thank you. Question from Elaine: is there a monthly maintenance charge to use ManageXR? So what's your pricing model?
Yeah, absolutely. So we charge per device per year or per month. And so, if you've got a 10 devices, it's basically a seat-based model on a per device. Yeah. As you scale, there's going to be, economies of scale that we're happy to chat about on a call. But yeah, right now it's $10 per device per month.
Okay, great. Thank you. Bargain. Patrick, you've just said you're leaving, but hopefully you're still here because I was just getting to your question. If not, I'll send you the link. So first question was around, you support the business Oculus platform. So, I mean, please confirm that that's a no, it's a different platform. Is that correct, Luke?
Yeah, that's right. Yep, different platform.
Can you manage shipping, logistics / owner transfer? So if you have a pool of, say, 100 headsets at one central hub and you want to distribute them to different areas in the country, can you help with that?
Yeah, so this is one where we would likely be relying on a provisioning or reseller partner to help navigate, and certainly something that we'd love to chat about and go into depths and understand where we can help. But at the end of the day, we aren't a shipping company, and it's going to be relying on partnering and figuring out the best solution for you.
Yeah. And then can you support location pooling and manage booking headsets? I think it sounds like your resellers or provision managers might help with that.
Yeah, totally. Managing booking headsets. Part of me feels like that's also just related to maybe like location-based entertainment. Sorry to try and to decipher the question. Yeah, I'm actually not sure, but
yeah, I think it could also mean, so a lot of our clients, in fact most of them, all share headsets, but sometimes they'll do it on a booking system, almost like a library where you rent a book, you rent the headset, or at universities it's more common that they would like book a slot, say with the careers department. So it could mean that as well, but I think
totally. Yeah. And those use cases are actually super common in certain workflows. Location-based entertainment is one where you want to book your time with a headset. Libraries is another. Actually, we work a lot with university libraries. We don't kind of handle that real-time management or the booking of a session of a headset. That's going to have to be a different solution. But we are, a backbone to make sure those devices are locked down and have the content they're supposed to have.
Yeah. And the final question, if somebody uses ManageXR and then they are lending headsets to different people and say they take them home, it does still work once they get home. It's not tied to like a Wi-Fi network or anything like that.
No, absolutely not. In fact, we make it so that these devices can operate offline because that's a very common need. So you can take these headsets anywhere you want once they're set up. The idea is that they can be fully offline. The next time they get online, they will sync with ManageXR. They'll make sure that they're fully up to date. And that's all stuff that you can track over, online as well. To see, when was the last time this device was online? Is the content that it has what I want it to have? Things like this, which is really useful for troubleshooting. When you get a call from from one of your employees, say, "Hey, my device is doing this, or it doesn't have the app it's supposed to have." Well, you just jump on ManageXR and you can be able to tell them, "Oh, this is why." So it can be used from anywhere, and including in an offline state, because sometimes you want to be out using VR on an oil rig or in a prison. Like there's a lot of really cool use cases that also require, not being offline entirely.
Yeah. Okay. Brilliant. So we are just out of time. Thank you to everybody who asked some questions. It was good to have lots of engagement this evening. So thank you so much, Luke, for joining us today. It's been really interesting, and I think I speak on behalf of everyone when I say how valuable this has been. I feel like I've learned more about NDMs as well. Thanks to everybody who joined us. So VirtualSpeech is a partner of ManageXR, so please reach out if you'd like to learn more about scaling VR training or other immersive projects in your organisation. Our next webinar will be in mid-December, just before we all finish for Christmas. And if you want to stay updated on our topic, you can sign up to our newsletter, or we'll drop you an email with this recording anyway, so you can just reply to that. So yeah, thanks again, Luke, and everybody who joined, and hope you all have a great day.